Hi and welcome back. In this video, we're taking a look at models, relationships between models, and database migrations in a Django project. If you have been following along with the other videos in this series, this is video number 3, then you've probably got a Django project already started and a Django app. And the only change that we've made so far is we've registered our app in settings.py. If you haven't been following along, I recommend that you do so. Watch the first and second videos before continuing. Alright, let's get started. To begin, let's go to models.py. This is a file inside our app, and we can collapse the project folder for now. So this is this models.py that we're going to talk about here. You can also see in our app that we've got a database migrations folder that is currently empty. Well, it has a dunder init.py file. We're going to create a database migration in this video, or Django is going to create a database migration for us after we've created our models. So let's begin with that. In this series of videos, we're going to create a recipe sharing project where users can sign up and log in, create recipes, and share them with other people, and rate other people's recipes as well. So what kind of data do we need to store for an application like this? Well, we're going to need users, although those come built in with Django, so there's nothing for us to do there. And we'll also need recipes and ratings. So let's create those two models. This is how most model definitions start. We create a class representing our model, and we give it a reasonable name, because Django is going to infer a lot of things based on the name of this class. And it inherits from the model class in the models package. Now, within this class, we define the various fields that a model might have. Remember that a class is a blueprint for creating objects. So in that sense, the class here defines the table in the database and its columns. And when we create an object of the recipe class, that will represent one row in the table and will give us a Python object with values that are stored in each of the table's cells. So here we define the fields or columns that will be in this table. And we also define if there are any constraints or any particular bits of validation that we want to do on these columns. At its core, a recipe has a title, ingredients, and instructions. So let's create those fields first. To create a field, we define a class variable. We define the field name, and this will become the column name. So that's title. And then we say it's equal to a character field in this case. And you can give it some validation like maximum length. I'll show you how to do other types of validation in a second. To add fields such as text fields, which are for longer bits of text, we can use models.textfield. Here, the ingredients and the instructions are two text fields. The kind of data stored in these fields is similar. They're both strings at the end of the day, but we can also choose to generate HTML forms for our users to give us data to put into one of these models. And we use the model to do that. When we do that, the character field will be turned into an input of type text, which displays as a single line input. The text field will be displayed as a text area, which allows us to enter multiple lines of text in the same place. That's why we use different kinds of field for these names. Now, you usually want to store the creation time and also the update time for any model. To store the creation time, we create a datetime field and we say auto now add equal true as an argument. This will mean that when we create a new object of type recipe and we save it to the database, the created at field will be populated at that point with the current date and time. To create an updated at field that changes every time we modify the model, we do more or less the same thing, but we say auto now equal true instead of auto now add equal true. These are the key columns for our recipe, but there's one more thing that we need, and that's who created it or who the author is. And now we're talking about relationships between models. We need to refer to the user model that comes with the Django auth app that is already built in, and we've added it to our project. You can see that we've added the auth app to our project by going to settings.py and making sure that Django contrib auth is in installed apps. Because we've got that, we can then do from Django contrib auth models import user. And this is the user model that our application is going to use for authentication, for signing up, logging in, and so forth. So here we'll do models.foreignkey, and we refer to the user model. When we do this, Django will automatically create an author_ID column in the recipe table, so that it can refer to a specific user that created this recipe. You can also do things like onDelete and then models.cascade. And what this means is that when the author is deleted, all its recipes will be deleted as well. Finally, you can choose to add a related name, which I'm going to say is recipes. What this does is on every user model from now on, whenever you use a user in your views, you can say user.recipes, and that will give you all of the recipes for that user. Let's now create the rating model. Just as before, we create a class and we inherit from model, and then we define the various fields within it. The first one is going to be a recipe because a rating is related to a recipe. So just as we did for author, we can copy that, put it in here, and refer now to the recipe model. This is also why we've put the recipe class first, so we can refer to it from below. On the lead cascade seems reasonable to me, but now related name should be ratings. Each rating is left by a user, so this also needs a user. And you could leave it like this, changing the related name, but in this application, we're never going to want a user's ratings for anything, so I'm just going to remove the related name so we don't pollute the user namespace. Finally, each rating needs a value, which is going to be an integer field, and we're going to make sure that's between 1 and 5. In order to do that, we need to implement some custom validation. So we'll say from Django core validators, import min value validator and max value validator. And here in the integer field, we can say validators, and this is a list where min value validator has the value of 1 and max value validator has the value of 5. Now, whenever we try to create a rating object and save it to the database, at that point, we will make sure that the value is between 1 and 5. And because it's an integer, it must be whole numbers. Finally, for each rating, we will also store the created at column, and we will just copy that from up here. Now, there's something else that we need to do, and that's ensure that a user can only leave one rating on a given recipe. But we have to make sure that a user can leave many ratings, and we also have to make sure that each recipe can receive many ratings just from different users. How to do that? You might be tempted to add unique equal true, because that's something that you can add on any column. But this is not going to do what we want, because unique equal true on a column makes sure that the recipe ID that is created for this foreign key has to be unique in this table. And that would mean that in the entire ratings table, you can only leave a rating for a single recipe once. And similarly, if we do unique equal true on user, that would mean that each user can only ever leave one rating. Otherwise, their user ID would try to pop up twice in the ratings table when you create two rows, and that would not work because it's unique. So this is not what we want to do, and this is a common problem. So instead, we create a class meta, and here we say unique underscore together, and we pass in a tuple with recipe and user. And this means that the recipe and user together must be unique. So if a user leaves a rating for a recipe twice, that would have the same user ID and the same recipe ID twice, and that would not be valid. But a user can give many ratings to different recipes, and user and recipe together wouldn't be unique in those cases, so that would be okay. So far, we've looked at models and relationships. Now let's take a look at database migrations. Each of the apps that we've got registered in our application already comes with some database migrations, but we don't currently have a database. If you scroll down in settings.py, you'll see that we've got a default database of SQLite. So we should be able to see a SQLite file in our folder. The first thing to do is to create our database by running the migrations that already exist. That's the migrations for all these other apps. You can run migrations by saying python manage.py, making sure, by the way, that you've got your virtual environment activated. Migrate, and that is going to run the existing migrations. You can see in the terminal that we've got various migrations for content types, auth, admin, and sessions. These are all pre-existing apps that we've added here. And now we have a database file that you can see has a bunch of tables and columns, and these are all the pre-existing tables, for example, for user authentication. There's ID, password, username, etc. But now we want to modify this database and add our two new tables, recipe and rating. To do that, we'll say python manage.py make migrations. And this is going to create a migration file in our app. And it creates it here because the models that we've created are inside app. And within this database migration, you can see there are a few operations to create models. And this creates the actual tables in the database. You can see recipe and rating. Once you're happy with your migration, you can then run migrate again, and that is going to apply that migration that we've created. And now if we go to our database, you can see we've got app rating and app recipe. Something you might want to do to begin with is use the admin panel to create a few ratings and recipes. To do that, we have to go to admin.py and then import our models. So we'll say from app models import rating and recipe, and then admin site register recipe and rating. This is going to register our two models with the admin panel so that we can modify or create them using the admin panel. To use the admin panel, though, we also need to create a super user. So we'll say python manage.py, create super user, and now we need to give it a username. I use example username when I'm developing locally. An email address, you can use whatever you want, and a password such as example password that you need to give it twice. Once the super user is created successfully, we can type python manage.py run server to start our Django application. And then you can see it's running at 127.0.0.1:8000. What we've got here is the local computer's IP address. 127.0.0.1 is always your computer. And we're running on port 8000. If you're not sure what a port number is, don't worry too much about it. Just know that data can go to a specific port, and then the Django application is going to receive it when it's running on this port. Let's open this up. And now you can see that we've got our Django server running, and we get a congratulations page. But now we can go to any of the URLs defined in urls.py, and Django is going to perform that reverse URL search that we mentioned in the last video. So here we go to /admin. And this is the admin panel. Here we type example username and example password, and we can log in. Then you can see we've got a few things here: ratings, recipes, groups, and users. In the users table, we've got our example username that we've created. This is the super user. But if we go to recipes, you can see we've got nothing there. We can add a recipe. And then we can also select an author. I found that this dropdown sometimes doesn't work with the admin user, but you can always create a new user here simply by doing example user2 and give it a password. Then the author is there and you can select it, and then you can save this recipe. Now when you go into the recipe object, you can see it here and you can also modify it. But again, what I found is that this dropdown doesn't seem to want to work. Maybe it's this Django version or an issue with my browser. If it works for you, then that's great. Let's go back to our editor, and you can see in the console there's a lot of stuff in the logs. That's because the admin panel requires quite a lot of things such as icons and style sheets, etc. to work, so that's all that you're seeing there. But don't worry too much about it. You can always stop the server and your application with Control-C. And in this video, we've learned how to create models, define relationships between them, and run database migrations. Plus, we've registered our models with the admin panel, and we've made some modifications with the admin panel. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. If you want to learn a lot more about Django and full stack development with it, including HTML, CSS, a lot of Python, and a lot more Django, please consider checking out our full stack Django course. It's linked down in the description below this video. Thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.